So just as a heads up, we are recording this presentation. In a moment, I'm going to introduce the other speakers who will be joining me today. But before that, just wanted to give a bit of an intro and overview of just what we're going to cover and sort of what's coming up next. So as I mentioned, we're recording this. We record these webinars, and we then once we have all the recorded information and all cleaned up, we do post them on our website. So you'll be able to access this webinar along with the 3 previous webinars we've done in this series on our website. Both the slides and the recordings of the presentations will be available. This is part of a series that we're doing related to electric school buses. As I mentioned, we have done previous ones on our bus voucher incentive program and our charging voucher incentive program. After this one on fleet electrification planning, next month we'll be doing one on the New York School Bus Incentive Program and how it relates to other funding sources, aka stacking, which is a term you probably heard a lot. We will talk about how our program interacts with those other programs, how funding works if you receive funding from multiple programs, and how to navigate that process. In June, we'll be talking about the charging voucher redemption process. So we went through the charging voucher application process on our previous webinar, and next we'll be talking about how to redeem your voucher once you've been approved. And then in July, we'll be doing a webinar related to site planning for ESB charging. So this is all about how to lay out your site, how your site, how your charging needs and installations would relate to a capital project, and how you work with state ed and all the other authorities in that process. And then probably several more to follow after that. And just a quick note, obviously we've talked about our electric school bus guidebook quite a bit. We released the full series of that guidebook over the last few months, and we will be adding an additional guide to that, which we've been referring to as Guide 0 because we came up with the numbering before we realized we need this guide. It's all about the stakeholders and the key actions. So it's sort of a summary of all the guides, but also sort of lays out the key stakeholders in the process. Those folks in your school district or in your company who are responsible for different components of the fleet transition process, and then also the external stakeholders who you'll partner with, some of which we'll talk about today as well. We'll also be updating our financial incentives guide, which is Guide 4, and that as we've mentioned in the past, is out of date now that we've released our New York School Bus Incentive Program, and there have been significant changes to the Clean School Bus Program by the EPA. So those are things to look forward to. As far as how to be alerted when things like that happen, please sign up for updates. We have a mailing list which you can access on our website, and it's a 2-second form. Sign up for that form, and then you'll be updated when we send out email updates and information on new events. I forgot to mention, for our future webinars, they are listed on our website, our NYSBIP, New York School Bus Incentive Program website. You can sign up for those and RSVP already for the next 3 that I mentioned: May 14th, June 11th, and July 9th. Okay, quick introductions. So I'm Vinay Rashika, Senior Project Manager at NYSERDA, and I've been leading a lot of the electric school bus work that we've been doing, particularly around fleet electrification planning. I'm joined today from NYSERDA by Hannah Abdu, and also by John Havrilla from Wendell, who will be speaking as well. Hannah and John, do you want to provide some quick intros?
Sure. As Winnie said, I'm Hannah Abdu. I'm the project manager for the New York School Bus Incentive Program. So all things related to this program, I'm deep in there. I have been working at NYSERDA for about a year, and I'm excited to work on all these projects with everyone.
Hi, I'm John Havrilla. I'm Director of Alternative Fuels for Wendell. I'm an owner at Wendell Companies, and I oversee all of the battery electric bus school transition plan work that's being done at Wendell.
Thanks, Hannah and John. Natalie Toro from NYSERDA is also joining us today. She'll be keeping an eye on the questions and is also very important to our New York School Bus Incentive Program team and making sure that we keep things moving on the incentive side. Okay, we can head on to the next slide and talk about the agenda for today. And then I'll hand it over to Hannah to start the presentation. So today, as I mentioned, we're talking about fleet electrification planning. For ease, we will refer to this as FEP throughout the presentation. Fleet electrification plan is a very long title. So we chose poorly in that sense, but we will be referring to it as an FEP. We'll go over what an FEP is, how it works, what the benefits are for completing it, both in terms of what it provides to you as a resource and then also how it helps you apply for incentives, how to complete an FEP, which you can do with support from NYSERDA and our pre-qualified contractors or outside of NYSERDA as well, what's included in the FEP in terms of the scope of the study, and then what are the key steps of a fleet electrification plan. So we'll go through that task by task. John from Wendell will be covering a lot of that alongside me, and we'll sort of do it as a bit of a dialogue. We'll see how that works, but that's the approach we'll be taking for today. So you can go on to the next slide, and Hannah, take it away.
Alrighty, so we'll start by talking about what an electrification plan is. So essentially, this is a planning document. This is basically you getting all of your ducks in a row to make sure that your transition over the next 10 years up until 2035, you have those phase steps, and it tells you exactly what you need to do, what chargers you need to buy, what infrastructure you need to do, what chargers you need to get, buses and chargers you need to get. So it's a comprehensive roadmap to electrifying a district or a contractor's entire school bus fleet by 2035. So again, this is an evaluation of your existing fleet operations as well as your depot electrical capacities. And the plan will serve as a guide or action plan that will identify and prioritize recommendations, including bus purchases, charger purchases, and infrastructure that needs to be done to help you make informed decisions about your infrastructure purchases. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. So what are the benefits of an FEP? What you will get or what it provides to you is role identification and workforce needs. So it's going to help tell you, all right, I need to contact these specific people internally and externally. These are all going to be partners in this transition, and we're going to need their help. So that may include utilities, your utility provider, dealers, engineers, operators. There's a lot of people that are going to be involved in getting this transition to happen. So a fleet electrification plan is going to tell you who those people are and who you need to bring in to help you. It will also provide a customized and tangible plan to meet your specific electrification requirements. So, each district has their own nuances. They have their own fleet sizes, the way they operate. Each one is a little bit different. And so an FEP is going to be a tailored plan for your specific situation. It will also be a living resource that can easily be updated to account for new technologies or route changes. As you all have seen in the electric school bus environment so far, the technology has already improved and changed significantly from where we were, let's say 5 years ago. So the fleet electrification plan, though it is going to give you step-by-step what you need to do, it will provide flexibility for you so that as technology improves, gets better, other options come online, hydrogen fuel cell maybe, who knows what's going to happen over the next 10 years. But this plan will give you those steps, but then will also provide you that flexibility to make changes as you move along throughout the process. And finally, it will serve as a reference document for the annual education law 3638, reporting requirements. So this plan again is something that you can go to the state and say, hey, like this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm going to tackle this. And so it provides a great resource in that way. And finally, some other benefits about the fleet electrification plan is that it will unlock additional incentives from the New York School Bus Incentive Program. So on the charging side, if you've completed a fleet electrification plan and it meets all of our qualifications, you can get $30,000 in additional charging voucher funds on a per bus basis. So really, you know, the base voucher amounts for this charging voucher start at 25,000 and go up to 35,000. But then if you've completed a fleet electrification plan, you can now get either $55,000 or $65,000, depending on your priority status, on a per bus basis per charger. So that's a lot of infrastructure money that you'll have access to once you've completed this. Additionally, on the school bus voucher side, if you've completed an FEP, you will also have access to additional or a higher fleet or vehicle cap. So right now, each district is limited to the number of buses they can receive through the program. This is to ensure that school districts, that we can service as many school districts as we can across the state. However, if you do the FEP, you can unlock additional buses, which is an awesome opportunity. Alrighty, next slide, please. So how to complete a fleet electrification plan. So there's kind of two different ways you can go about this. I'll talk about going through NYSERDA directly first. So if you come to NYSERDA and you say you want to complete a fleet electrification plan, NYSERDA will provide you with funding for developing that plan. So if you're a contractor, we'll cover up to 50% of the plan. If you're a non-priority district, we'll cover up to 75% of the costs. And if you're a priority district, we'll cover 100% of the costs of this plan. Plans generally cost around $30,000 to $50,000. So again, a lot of money out there to help you get this planning done and pay for most of it, which is awesome. Additionally, NYSERDA will provide you access to pre-qualified contractors who can develop the plan. For example, we have Wendell here today. They're a pre-qualified contractor. Additionally, we'll provide administrative work. So we will actually reduce the burden on the fleet owner by directly paying the contractor. If that's the route you want to go, we could go either, you can either pay the contractor directly and then NYSERDA will reimburse you, or if you want to save on some of those administrative burdens, NYSERDA can actually pay the contractor directly. NYSERDA will also review all of the deliverables throughout the planning process to ensure that they meet expectations and will meet the qualifications needed to access the additional NYSBIP funds. And finally, we will provide approval of the proposed scope of work, as well as the final report, ensuring that the district receives the resources and everything else needed to actually execute the plan. So NYSERDA can provide a lot. So if you come through us, and if you go to the next slide, another option for you is for districts and contractors to develop a fleet electrification plan on their own. So you can go out and find a qualified engineer with electric vehicle and charging experience that's recommended. The NYSBIP implementation manual. So Ben, I saw a question come into the chat about where you can find information about the fleet plan to access those additional funds. We have those written out in our implementation manual, which is on our website. And we'll walk through it today, what's in there. But that's where you would find the necessary things that need to be in the plan. And then finally, once you've actually completed that plan, you can actually submit that to NYSERDA for review and approval. And you'll be able to qualify for NYSBIP bonuses, which is awesome. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so Ben, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is what is in our implementation manual. So what does a fleet electrification plan include? It will include your electrification goals. So just essentially an overview of what you need, your approach to the electrification plan, as well as, potential timelines and milestones for electrification. It should also include a route analysis, which essentially the contractor will come in and assess the current routes that you're on to determine which bus routes are best to electrify first, as well as determining the minimum battery size required, as well as total energy required for your new electric school buses. Next is a utility assessment. I would say this is number one biggest priority. I would recommend all fleets start working on this immediately because you're going to need this regardless of whether you do the fleet electrification plan or not. But essentially, this is reaching out to your utility and having them do an assessment of your site to tell you exactly how much power is on your site and how much power will you need to accommodate full electrification. And they'll tell you how much power, additional power you'll need. They'll tell you what equipment or upgrades that need to be made on both the utility and the customer side. And it'll also talk about costs of those infrastructure upgrades. So again, utility assessment is extremely important. Next, we have the charging strategy. So the contractor will help you determine what kinds of chargers you need in order to charge the buses that best fit your needs and will accommodate all of your routes. And finally, we have a phasing plan that kind of ties everything together, and it essentially is a year by year or month by, depending on how large scale the project is, but it will tell you each step of the way what infrastructure you need to install each year, which buses or how many buses you're going to purchase each year, how many chargers you're going to purchase each year. Essentially a year by year plan explaining exactly what you're going to do or how you're going to accomplish this electrification. All right, so again, that's generally what the fleet electrification plan includes. You may have other needs that you can work with the contractor to include in your scope, but these are the general items that we're looking for, especially to get those extra funds through NYSBIP. All right, next slide. All right, and I will pass it off to Vinny and John, who will work through the fleet electrification plan steps, as well as giving you some examples, some real world examples of how this works.
Sorry about the delay there. I was just responding to a question in the chat. Just to quickly reiterate that the question was around the process or requirements to become a pre-qualified contractor through NYSERDA. We used a pool of contractors that we have to provide technical assistance on a variety of topics called FlexTech. That program is currently closed to new contractors applying. However, it will be open again in the future. What I would also say is if you're not a pre-qualified contractor, you can also still participate in this process. What we do then is we work directly with the contractor who's interested in working on behalf of a school, make sure that they have some qualifications in this area, and ensure that the scope of work meets the same requirements that we hold our pre-qualified contractors to. We do have a sample statement of work that we do send around, and we can provide that as well as a resource. To give you a sense of basically what we're going to talk about right now, which is the FEP steps or tasks that are required. All right, so the fleet electrification plan is, as far as NYSERDA's projects go, usually include around 6 tasks. These may be broken up differently depending on which contractor you work with. However, the key components are data collection, route analysis, developing a conceptual charging strategy, that interaction with the utility Hannah was talking about, that's really important. Developing then a concept plan for your site and a phasing plan for your transition to electric school buses. So that's really a procurement schedule. and then coming up with some cost estimation related to that. So those are the key steps we can go on. And so what we're going to do now is John and I are going to go back and forth. I'll talk about some general characteristics of each task, and then John will help us with some real world examples from some previously completed or ongoing fleet electrification plans that Wendell's supporting districts on. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, the first, seems like we had some issues with our slides. I guess there is some animation. You can, sorry, go back to that previous slide. Yeah, so data collection is the first step of the process. This is really an important step for the school districts to participate in, as well as the utility. But really from the school district, once the contract is executed and the project starts, the contractor you're working with will send you a data collection request that will include a variety of things that John will then tell you about. But as far as the school's role in this process, or the school district's role or contractor's role in this process, it's really important to provide as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, and making sure that you're not leaving certain components out. You know, we've had issues where districts maybe provided their regular routes but didn't include after school, things like that. It's really important to obviously go through this process in a transparent way, provide as much information up front as possible, and note, importantly, note if you have gaps, if you can't access, you don't have data available to you, then we can work through some workarounds on that. So next slide, and over to John to talk about an example of this.
Thank you, Vinny. So data collection, the request for information that we put out is much more detailed than this, but these are general categories. So fleet information, we're really looking for, the types of buses you have, size of buses, make, model, age, that type of information. Bus schedules and route data. This is probably one of the most critical pieces of information that we need, because what we're trying to do is determine the amount of energy that the bus needs to complete the route. And that is critical because, we're making a lot of assumptions based upon the energy that the bus needs. Bus parking and storage arrangements. Are you storing your buses indoors or out? How are you storing the buses? We need to understand the size of the garage. We're actually seeing instances where an electric bus is a little bit longer than a traditional bus. Will the buses fit in the storage facility? Will they fit in the garage? So we're looking at things like that. Current fueling, how are they fueled? We look at amount of fuel used, because we're looking at a comparison as a double check to see, when we come up with what energy required to complete a route is, we're looking and comparing that with how much diesel is being consumed or gasoline today. Bus maintenance records. If we're actually looking at differences between electric bus costs and traditional diesel bus costs, and we need to know what the maintenance records are. And these are high level maintenance records. We don't need extremely detailed. They can be done in groups. Utility data is very critical. And typically what we will do is we'll work with the school district to engage the utility and then work directly with the utility to get the information that we need. And then existing school electrical distribution information. In most cases, we're finding that the existing service and the existing electrical distribution system within the school is not adequate to provide charging. And we typically wind up adding a service, but we need to look at the electrical distribution system. And then an existing site plan. We need to understand how chargers can be placed, where they can be placed, how the buses are parked, how they get in and out, etc. Next slide. So some of the difficulties that we're seeing with data is a lack of a comprehensive list of buses with ages and types, lack of a replacement schedule. Our transition plans are based upon a replacement schedule, and we look at how the district looks at trying to replace its buses. If a schedule doesn't exist, we'll work with the district to come up with one that they feel comfortable with. Also, a lot of the information is a snapshot in time. Buses are often being replaced and retired, so we need to understand that. Fleet size varies based on driver availability. Obviously, drivers are very difficult to get right now. All school districts are wrestling with this. So we have maintenance personnel driving. We've actually got directors of transportation driving buses. So it really changes a lot. So routes change often, but we need to understand what the typical routes are. Some of the issues we get, example of receiving routes that are not linear. So one route ends at 3 o'clock, but starts the next route at 2:40. And so, what we'd like to get is the route information as detailed as you have it. And then typically what we'll wind up doing is sitting down with the transportation director or whoever is managing all of this and work through it so that we understand how the buses are running. Routes not received in needed format. We request the start time as the time the bus leaves the depot, and the end time is the time it arrives back at the depot. Oftentimes we don't get that. And so what we'll need to do is sit down and understand how that data is impacted. So it's really working with the district. The data collection side is probably the heaviest part for the district as far as participation. It's the upfront work. And in a lot of cases, what we will do when we submit the application on the district's behalf to NYSERDA, we'll send the request for information to allow them to start gathering that information while we're waiting for approval and a PO from NYSERDA. We don't actually start work till we get the PO, but it gives you time to start collecting that data and doesn't delay the start of the project once the PO is issued. Next slide.
All right, so next up after data collection, and as John queued up perfectly, this is really the bulk of the work from the district's perspective, and then the contractor you're working with will help you work through the first phases of this. We put tasks 2 and 3 together because really it is a bit of an iterative process. You're basically looking at the routes and determining how long they are, if there are deadhead miles, the amount of time it takes to get to and from depots to your first and last stops on the route, all that information to determine what is the daily mileage. Then your contractors will be working to basically translate that into a power requirement. So how much of your battery on an electric school bus will be needed to enable the school bus to complete its route. That helps to on a route-by-route basis, that helps to determine the minimum specification for that school bus. So what is the battery size needed to do that? And then over the course of a week, over the course of a month, does that battery capacity continue to meet those requirements based on the overnight charging schedules? So that's really the components of task 3, the conceptual charging strategy. What the contractors are trying to do is basically find the optimal level of both the battery size on the bus and the charging power at the depot so that your infrastructure is sized appropriately to your charging needs without going way above and beyond what's needed. That's really helpful for a multitude of reasons. Obviously in terms of how the utility analyzes this and the grid side needs to bring the charging to site, but also to enable you to have some flexibility within how you operate your buses. You can certainly segment your fleet and say, these are my shorter routes, these are going to charge in these locations and at a lower rate. And these are going to be my longer routes and these need higher power charging. And those are going to charge here, or you could build in some flexibility. So the contractors will work through that process with you and ensure that the conceptual charging strategy and the route analysis meet your needs. Okay, next slide, and back over to John.
Yeah, so the route analysis and conceptual charging strategy, as stated, really is some of the core of what we're trying to do. We analyze the bus route data, and we're looking for how much energy a bus uses. And then we look at the feasibility of the use of electric bus on the current routes. We work with the district to understand what their preferred vendor is for buses. And then we will try to work with the preferred vendor to determine, which of their buses would be able to complete a route. If a bus can't complete the route from that vendor, we'll look at other vendors and make recommendations. So we're really anticipating the energy requirements for the route, the charging requirements, both overnight as well as during the day in between morning and afternoon routes, and determining the minimum battery size requirements, as well as the minimum charging durations per route. And then peak energy usage impact is determined from this. So after we've collected all this data, we can then put together basically a load profile that we can work with the utility on to say, all right, here is what the new demand is going to be given the fact that we're charging buses. Next slide. Some of the key takeaways, this was a smaller district. This had only 10 buses. 6 were running routes, 4 were spares. Minimum battery size requirements, 10 210 kilowatt hour IC buses were what was recommended initially, with 4 315 kilowatt hour IC buses. Required charger sizes, 10 24 kilowatt hour chargers, 2 60 kilowatt hour chargers, and 2 120 kilowatt hour chargers were looked at. And the minimum combined bus electrical demand with all 10 route buses converted to BEVs during the winter month was calculated to be 260 kilowatts. So that was what the maximum route would require. And I apologize, there was 14 buses, 4 spare, 10 route buses. So I misstated that in the very beginning. So those numbers do make sense when you look at the chart in the upper right-hand side. We try to minimize the number of different types of buses that we're recommending and the number of chargers that we're recommending. Unlike diesel buses where you can use any bus at any time for any route, electric buses, really need to have almost a specific route assigned to them in groups. We could do more charger types, but that becomes an operational problem. So we're trying to minimize the number and types of chargers that we're using and the number and types of buses that we're using. We're also recommending that as you're replacing older buses, that the older buses be put on shorter routes and the newer buses put on longer routes. That helps as battery electric buses age, the battery capacity drops to some extent. So putting them on shorter routes makes sense. Also, battery technology is continually improving. So we're finding that batteries are lasting longer and can do longer routes as the technology changes. So we also look at that, and that is part of the flexibility of the plan, because you'll know what the energy required to run a route is. Next slide.
Okay, John, I think we've got some animation on this slide as well. I think 2 clicks should do it. Thank you. All right, so the next part of the process is the electric utility analysis. So all of that information compiled by your contractor and then translated into a conceptual charging strategy will then be used to work with the utility, provide the utility some information on the total power requirement for your charging site or sites. And the utility will then do some analysis about what types of upgrades might be required. Some of you may have gone through this process already through what's called a fleet assessment questionnaire that many of the utilities have. If that's the case, there's no problem with that. What will happen as part of this process is that the fleet electrification plan will then determine more specifically what's required at your site in terms of the chargers, the charging specifications, and total power usage. That will then go back to the utility and potentially revise some of their analysis and determination of what's needed to charge buses at your site. Next slide, and back to John.
So as I stated before, in most cases, charging battery electric buses requires an additional service from the utility. We would work with the utility to understand whether an upgrade to the existing or a new service is recommended and how that would be done. We provide a load profile to the utility so that they understand what the charging requirements are, both midday as well as overnight. And it's really an iterative process working with the utility. In this particular case, this district had, the utility had power in the substation. They did need to upgrade some of the distribution, but it fit into a program that they were already working on. So they already had plans developed to increase the distribution in that area. So the costs that are going to be incurred by the district for the utility side upgrades are between 60 and 80,000 is what the utility estimated to upgrade the feeds to the school district to be able to provide the power that the school district would require for charging of the buses. In this particular case, this is a municipal utility, so they do not have the programs that some of the larger New York State utilities have. So this cost would be borne by the district. In other cases where it's an investor-owned utility in New York State, they have make-ready programs, and we would work with the utility to determine how much of that cost could actually be covered under the make-ready program offered by the utility. Next slide, and back to Vinny.
Okay, so you've got your response from your utility in terms of what's required, what types of upgrades are required. The next step is then to sort of lay that out, both in time and in space. So that looks like a conceptual site plan, which sort of looks like what John just showed on the slide, but you'll see in a little bit more detail shortly. And then a phasing plan. So over the next several years, when are you going to buy your first bus? When are you going to buy your next buses? How do you get yourself into a procurement cycle for electric buses? And what ratio, I guess, in this pre-2027 time that we're in right now, what sort of ratio of electric versus diesel or gas buses are you going to purchase? And then that gets laid out all the way till you meet your requirements and or 2035, which is when the full fleet needs to be transitioned over. I think that covers it for that. So next slide and back to John.
Thank you, Vinny. Some of the things that need to be considered in this phase 2 are the maintenance facilities as well as bus storage. There are requirements in New York State for ventilation. There's a minimum amount of ventilation required to meet code. If we wind up placing the charging indoors, then increased ventilation would be needed to remove the excess heat created by the chargers. In most cases, we can find space outside to put the chargers, and the only thing you have indoors are the dispensers. But that's one of the considerations that need to be looked at. Fire protection, we recommend enhanced fire protection to suppress the flames and protect the structure for lithium-ion battery fires. The data that we're seeing shows that there is not an increase in the number of fires for battery electric versus their ICE counterparts, but lithium-ion battery fires are more difficult to fight. They're a hotter fire and they're more difficult to put out. So we are recommending fire protection systems in storage facilities and maintenance facilities where battery electric buses are stored. And then other things such as lifting equipment. Batteries add additional weight. Most lifts we're finding are still adequate, but they should be evaluated to make sure that the vehicles that are being specified can be lifted by those lifts. Structural enhancements to the building structures to handle, dispensers, cables, conduits, everything that may need to go into the ceiling. Make sure that the structure is sound and can handle all of that. The other piece that is there is the O&M and operating procedures. We would discuss with you modifications to existing standard operating procedures on how to handle battery electric vehicles, including fire prevention and safety measures. Next slide. So the transition plan is developed, it has phases, and it starts with the bus procurement schedule. And it includes the 2027 deadline as well as the 2035 deadline. What we're showing here is specific to Sweet Home Central School District. They have 67 buses. This is their battery electric bus procurement plan. We worked with them on this particular plan. If you don't have a specific plan, we can help develop one. But it's the basis to start the procurement or the phasing plan. Next slide.
All right. So now with all that information, essentially the process is compiling this into a process that you can undertake over a series of steps. The phasing plan on the bus side obviously needs to match up and align with your charging needs. So the phasing plan also will look at what are the triggers or thresholds when you're going to want to install new infrastructure. What is the most economically advantageous time to undertake the utility upgrades that you might need. Say you're purchasing your first bus or two or three, you may be able to utilize your existing utility connection. Sorry, my computer is losing charge for some reason. I'm going to speak quickly and then pass back over to John and hopefully figure that out. Yeah. So then, when do you want those big utility upgrades to be done? When that's happening, do you want to install conduit and wiring for additional chargers so you don't have to dig up the ground every time? That's essentially what task 6 does, and then wraps all that up into your final plan, which you'll have as a reference going forward. Back to you, John.
Thank you, Vinny. So again, this is the one that was developed for Sweet Home. So this is the phasing and cost. We wound up with 4 phases, and I'll go into a little bit more details of what all 4 of those phases look like. But we also added a temporary charging phase, which is kind of a misnomer because they're not going to be temporary chargers. We've wound up that they're going to be permanently installed. But phase 0 is a temporary charging phase for 3 TVIP buses. They decided that they wanted to take advantage of the TVIP program, and so they did apply and were awarded under the TVIP program. So they're going to buy 3 buses for the 2024-2025 school year. So they are arriving late this year. The total phasing, the installation upgrades of the national grid infrastructure as well as the charging infrastructure will not be ready for these 3 buses. So we're looking at some different scenarios, and we've come up with some chargers that actually have integral battery packs within them that can operate off the existing electrical infrastructure within the building. So we're putting in 3 chargers that have battery packs associated with them. They will trickle charge off the existing system and then be able to provide a fast charge to the 3 buses. And that should work fine for these first 3. Phase 1 is really the major phase. That is the new national grid service required, primary cables, etc., distribution equipment, power feeds, fire protection upgrades, and charging equipment for up to 34 chargers. And then phase 2 is an additional set of chargers, phase 3, and then phase 4 is really optional. That is for their spare buses and may actually be replaced because of the temporary phase. They're looking at a total all-in of all phases of about $11 million over the time period. Next slide. So I know this is a little small, but basically what you're seeing here is on the diagram on the left, that's phase 1. I don't know if anybody can see my cursor, but the first piece here is the fire pump. So we're putting in a new fire pump that will feed a new sprinkler system for the bus maintenance facility. We're also, that's phase, National Grid will install a new transformer and will provide power back to electrical distribution equipment, new equipment in the back of the property to provide chargers along the back wall here, which will give them 34 buses in the first phase. The second phase, they're going to pick up this row of chargers down here at the bottom of the screen in the second diagram. Next slide, please. In the third phase, we're picking up additional chargers right along the operations building. And then in the fourth phase, we're picking up chargers at the very top of the building. And this is also where the temporary chargers are going. So those will probably become permanent chargers, and we'll pick those up there. Next slide. In addition to the procurement schedule of buses, the other critical components are the utility service upgrades. Those can be lengthy depending upon what needs to be done on the utility side, and can impact the schedule. If it's just replacement of the transformer or addition of a transformer and a new service, it may not be too bad. But if the utility needs to make some significant distribution upgrades, that can take additional time. The biggest piece that we're seeing today is main switchgear. Switchgear can take upwards of 20 months for delivery right now. So we take all of that into consideration when we're looking at the phasing plan to make sure everybody understands how this can be built out and what the timing is. And with that, I'll turn it back to Vinny if Vinny's available.
Vinny's computer died, so he is trying to get on.
No worries. Can you go to the next slide, John? Okay. So we can, we'll walk through some frequently asked questions. We'll start off with, how long does a fleet electrification plan take? So this really could vary, especially as more and more districts apply to do this kind of work, and it also obviously depends on the situation, your school specific situation, but around 6 to 8 months is what we've been seeing as far as, you know, from start to finish. The next question, oh, I see Vinny popped back on. Vinny, we're going through some FAQs and just spoke about the how long does a fleet electrification plan take? So we're on to the next question.
I was just trying to demonstrate what happens when you don't plan in advance, which is your computer dies in the middle of a webinar. Sorry about that. I don't know if you can hear me all right. I hope it's okay, but Hannah, if you want to keep going, I'm happy to jump in whenever, but keep going with the FAQs.
Okay, great. So the next question is, our fleet electrification plan is done. So what do we do next? The next step is implementation. So getting your project started. So we would recommend one, reaching out to your utility. That's definitely, you know, part of this FEP process in general. So not that, because we already did this in the electrification plan. But the next thing to do would be to start applying for your buses and your chargers, taking advantage of any incentive programs you have. Again, Wendell or, you know, another contractor will work through the different incentive programs you can take advantage of. But yeah, some of the next steps after that is actually, you know, applying for those grants, getting your money, putting in your purchase orders, and getting it started. Vinny, I'll pass it off to you to keep going with these questions.
Yep, sounds good. And feel free to jump in, John, you as well, and we'll keep an eye on the chat too if other questions come in. But when do we qualify? I see a question. There's a question in the chat about the timeline the plans are looking toward. Essentially full fleet transition. That is not a specific answer, but sort of 10 years is probably a good time frame to think about. The full fleet transition requirement kicks in 2035. So our plan should be, the plans that are completed should be getting districts to 2035 with a fully electric or zero emission fleet. That could take more or less, as we noted in the phasing plan earlier. Some districts may be slightly ahead of that, and there might be reasons why that makes sense for them. But really, yeah, looking toward those milestones of 2027 when districts need and contractors need to purchase only zero emission buses, and then 2035 when everything needs to be transitioned over. Our next FAQ was about when you qualify for the FEP bonus. So if you participate in NYSERDA's program to provide fleet electrification planning, once you've completed the fleet electrification plan and it's been reviewed and approved by NYSERDA, that project is essentially being closed out. At that point, once the final plan is reviewed, you're then approved for those bonuses. If you haven't if you're not participating in NYSERDA's program and you're doing this on your own or with an independent contractor, you need to submit that plan to NYSERDA for our review, and you can do that either ahead of completing your charging voucher application, or there's an upload feature on that charging voucher application. And this is a preferred process because it keeps it a little bit neater for us. You can upload your completed fleet electrification plan there. We'll then review it. You'll receive essentially a pre-approval for the increased voucher amount, but you won't receive full approval until we've signed off on the fleet electrification plan. Any other questions coming through?
That's the question on, we already did a route or fleet assessment with our bus dealer or utility. Do we really need this? I would say yes for several reasons. The depth of analysis that the bus dealers go into really depends on the dealer and the type of bus that you're getting. We tend to, and most of the contractors will, do a very detailed, thorough analysis of the routes and look at, the coldest day of the year where batteries tend to perform less efficiently. And, one of our major concerns is we want to make sure that if we recommend a bus to you, that it will complete that route. We also look at multiple bus types and bus vendors to make sure that we're picking the right bus for the right route. So I would say yes. And as far as the utility, I would recommend that you contact the utility and look at their Make Ready program and see what they can provide you. We typically take what the utilities have done into account in what we're incorporating in the overall FEP. So that has been helpful because the utility is looking at it more from their perspective, looking into the site as opposed to looking from the site out. So they have two different functions, but I would do both.
John, there's a next question about in the chat about the Sweet Home example you provided and the amounts covered by NYSERDA, the utility. I think that, Natalie wrote in the chat, but this is essentially, it really is, this gets down to sort of case by case, and it depends on the timing of when you apply for different programs. If we have charging funding available or funding through the Bond Act, if EPA buses are applied for and awarded, a lot of that calculus really happens based on the incentive programs you apply for. And if you qualify for things like the Make Ready incentive program, which we mentioned earlier. John, you answered that question about the route and fleet assessment. Yeah, it would definitely make sense. And I think, in some cases, that information can be leveraged. In some cases, you might want an additional look at that. But yeah, our program is meant to encompass all of the components, and these are definitely inputs in the process. But definitely want to make sure that there's a full, clear plan laid out at the end of it. If you've already got a few electric school buses, you may have done a fleet electrification plan, or you may have the components of a fleet electrification plan, but maybe not. So just because you've got a few buses, you're charging them on your existing service, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're all set for a full fleet transition up to whatever number of buses you've got. I mean, if you've got 3 buses and your full fleet is 6, maybe you'll be okay if you don't need a new utility connection or any upgrades. But in most cases, I'd say in probably 99.9% of cases, this fleet electrification plan will help guide you past those first few bus purchases. If you have multiple bus depots or charge or plan to store your buses in different locations, we can accommodate that through the scope of work. Essentially, the contractor will work with you to evaluate one or more locations up to a certain amount that we'll define before the project starts. And the benefits of that are both, obviously, if that's where the buses are kept and there's a reason for that, then we can determine what's needed to electrify both of those locations. In some cases, it might be cheaper or faster to electrify certain locations versus others. So that's something that can be evaluated and work through with the contractor and your utility. And then if you have a contractor who provides your busing service, they can apply directly to NYSERDA for support. As we noted, we'll cover about 50%. We'll cover up to 50% of the cost of that study. Ideally, that study would look at all the school districts they serve and their full fleet and what's needed to electrify that. However, we have had school districts who have contracted fleets reach out to us because there's no one size fits all model for a contracted fleet. In some cases, school districts are working with 7 different contractors. Some cases they own the facility that the buses are stored at. So there's a variety of different ways we can go about this, and that's why we really encourage everyone to go to reach out to us and apply for the program individually. Tell us about your unique situation before all this work starts. We usually have an intake meeting where we'll talk you through the program. We'll learn a little bit about your fleet and specific characteristics of your site and your depots and things like that. And then I guide you toward the most feasible and beneficial path for you. So that's the end of our Q&A, and we're right at 12 o'clock. So I think we'll call it there, but John, you want to quickly answer the question about cold weather? I think you mentioned this earlier, but
yes, we use the bus manufacturers' data, the battery manufacturers' data, plus data that we've collected in real applications that have already been completed. And so we have battery curves that show how batteries perform in cold weather. And so we look at that when we look at the impact of temperature on the battery. And a lot of our analysis is done on the coldest day for the region, which typically occurs sometime in January for upstate New York, and look at the capacities at that from that perspective.
Thanks, John. All right. We don't want to take any more of your time. We really appreciate your participation, all the questions. As we noted, we'll be posting the slides as well as the recording of this in the next week or two. And we have future webinars scheduled, so please check out our website, sign up for our mailing list, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you so much.